What's up guys, it's Brad from LightArchitect here. In this video, I'm going to share two different color correction techniques showing how you can use basic masking and compositing inside of Blender to create the look of relighting your live action shot. Both of these techniques are fairly simple but can be applied in a lot of different ways to create a little bit more mood or just add a little bit of texture and layers of light and dark in your scene. Now before we get started, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's only so much we can do with this technique of masking and increasing light in some areas and decreasing it in others. The term relight is often thrown around like you can do anything in post-production, and while you can do a lot in post-production, this specific technique of masking is only really changing the intensity of where the mask is overlaid on your footage. When it comes to lighting in cinematography and photography, there are generally four properties of light that we talk about. We talk about the color of the light, the intensity of the light, the quality of the light or how soft it is, and finally the direction of the light. So we can't really change all four of these things without actually recreating our scene in 3D and relighting it in a way that the light actually refracts and interacts with the actual 3D geometry. But this is a nice way that you can definitely change the intensity of certain areas and create some hard hits of sunlight, for example, or as I said, just add a little bit more mood to your environment. But anyways guys, let's get started. The first shot I'm going to work with here is this shot of this man doing some woodworking, and inside of Blender I just want to try to add a little bit of sun hitting this back wall here. You can see there's a little bit of sun hitting the floor. I thought it'd be nice to add another layer of light in the background here, and then I might add a little touch of light here on this table in the foreground as well. This is a pretty standard tripod shot, so we won't have to 3D track it or anything, so it should be a pretty quick project. So I'll go ahead and close the window here, and the first thing we're going to do is just delete everything in our scene other than our camera here. So I'll just select our default cube and light, and now I'll select our camera, and now I'll select our camera here. We can place it anywhere in our scene since we're not actually utilizing the 3D aspect of Blender in this specific example. So I'll select our camera here. I'll go to our camera object data properties here, and then I want to add our clip as a background image. So I'll select the checkbox here and then click on add image, and now I'll select movie clip and then open that file that I just showed you. So this carpenter shot, go ahead and open that, and now as you can see here, it's in the background of our camera. So that's great. Now what we want to do is go to our compositing tab where we will make the magic happen. We want to select the use nodes checkbox here, and we won't actually need this render layer input, so I'll go ahead and delete that. We do want to have our movie clip input into the scene here, so I'll go ahead and press Shift A. I'll add an input movie clip, and then I'll select our carpenter movie clip here, and I'll just go ahead and connect this to our composite here, and then also I'll press Shift A. I'll create an output viewer and connect our movie clip to the viewer node as well. And now as you can see here, we can see what we're working with our viewer node here. All right, so now that we have kind of a general setup in the compositor, what we're going to do is we're going to create some masks to simulate the look of sunlight hitting this back wall here, as well as this foreground table. So we'll just go ahead and open up a new tab here, go to visual effects and then masking. Then I'll select our movie clip that we want to work with. And now what we can do is we can click on this new button here to create a new mask. And I'm going to label this mask Hard Sun. Okay, just so we can select it in our compositor easier. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find some spots here on this back wall. I think one of the most important things when using this technique is finding some geometry that's fairly flat, because this isn't actually a 3D technique and you won't be able to simulate the light hitting, for example, all of these three-dimensional objects in the back corner here. I think we'll have a little more success with this area right here, where even though there's a little bit of 3D with the tools here, they're pretty close to the wall, so I think we should be able to get away with it. So I'm just going to create a little mask here to simulate kind of like there's some sun leaking through a side window and maybe just hitting a few little touches of light on this back wall. So I'll press Control click, and I'll just create kind of a little sliver of light here, like so. And then we can press B, select all of it, place it wherever we want it. I think something like that's kind of nice. And a cool thing that you can do when you're creating these masks in Blender is you can go over here to the mask tab on the right, and you can actually add more mask layers for this specific mask. So for example, if we want to add another bit of sun, maybe leaking through this bottom portion, we can click the plus button here, and now we're working on a new mask layer, and we can add a totally separate mask, but it'll still be on this same mask data block, so we can select it the same way in the compositor. So I'll create a few little light leaks here, like so. And sometimes, you know, it can take some experimentation at times. I'm gonna go with that for now. And as I mentioned, I also want to create a little bit of sun hitting this table in the foreground. Now, arguably you could say that maybe you want to get the viewer's eye to look at our character here in the shot, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to create some layers of light and dark and try to make the shot look a little bit nicer. So I will go ahead and add a new mask layer here and just press Control-click as I'm drawing where I want the sun to be. Something like this would probably be pretty nice. This should be pretty good. And the cool thing about this is you can obviously adjust after we get into the compositing process. You can adjust these masks later as well, which I'm sure we will do. All right, so now that we have created some masks, let's go back to our compositing tab here. And what we're going to do is I'll press Shift-A and I'll go to Input Mask and we'll select our hard sun mask here. And now I'll press Shift-A and I want to go to Color and then add a Mix node right here before our viewer node, and I'll also connect it to our composite as well. And now what we're going to do is we're going to combine our movie clip with our mask here. So I'll go ahead and add this to our bottom layer of our image input. And now as you can see here, we're mixing our mask with our live action shot. So as you can see, if I bring our factor down, you can kind of see what's happening here. Now, obviously this isn't the right blend mode yet. So what we can do is we can change the blend mode here to one that's a little bit more effective in combining this mask with our live action footage. You can use color dodge, sometimes screen works, overlay works nicely as well, soft light works. I'm going to use color dodge for this specific effect. So I'll go ahead and select it here. And now as you can see here, it's just creating a nice little hit on our back wall. And obviously it looks a little bit fake right now. We do need to feather the masks a bit and then adjust some of the colors. So first I'll go back to our masking tab here and I'll just select all of our masks at the same time. And then I'll click on the scale feather button on the left here. And then I'll just scroll up to increase the feathers of our mask a bit. And I also want to click on the switch direction for our feather. So they're going out the other way, which will be more effective. So now it's just a matter of getting the softness of these masks correct. So I'll go back to compositing here, adjust the factor node a bit, and already that's looking pretty nice here. You know, if I weren't looking closely at it, I think I'd believe it. It's just a matter of adjusting our factor here a little bit maybe. I think this one's looking nice as well. Let's see, we can also add some color correction to the sun hits as well to maybe warm it up a bit, like it's maybe a little bit later in the evening. So I'll press Shift-A, go to Color Balance, add this right after our mask node, and then I'll just try to warm up everything on this mask, and there you go. Now it's a little bit warmer, hitting the back wall here. Yeah, looking pretty nice. And you know, you might say that these should be aligned, but you know, if light is leaking through different areas of the house or of this workshop, I think this could definitely happen in some environments. And yeah, I mean, there we have it. That's pretty much the first effect here. It's just a matter of adjusting your factor node to make sure you get the right intensity that you want. You know, make sure it's not too noticeable, but just adds a little bit of texture to the shot. You know, you can of course adjust all these masks separately. I want this one to be a little bit longer here maybe. But yeah, that is the general concept on how you can add some sun hits to your scene. So I'll finish the first setup here. Now I want to show another technique where we're going to actually use some tracking data on some mask layers to a little bit more precisely control the intensity of light in different portions of our frame. And then we're going to actually track the masks onto some tracking data so that we can keep that mood and not have it obvious throughout the entire shot as it moves around. But anyways, this will conclude the first part of the tutorial, how to add some nice hard hits of sun to pretty much any shot you like. And there are definitely some things I could do here to make it better, but for the sake of this tutorial, I think it should be pretty good. And there's a lot of freedom to play around with this technique. Alright guys, so in the second part of this tutorial, I'm going to show how we can relight this shot using some very soft power windows rather than those hard hits of sunlight. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to bring down the foreground corridor here along with the floor, the walls, and a little bit of the roof as well, so that the eye of the viewer goes more to the character here in the background, and it's also going to create a little bit more mood for our shot. And then I might also just add a little bit of soft masks just around our lights, so that there's some pools of light leading up to our character here. So in addition to this, this is also a moving shot. There's a little bit of handheld movement on it. It doesn't move throughout Z-Space, so we won't have to do a full 3D track, but we will have to do a tripod track inside of Blender in order to get those masks to track on our footage correctly. So anyways guys, back inside of Blender, let's get started. In this case, I'm going to delete everything in our scene here, including our camera. I'll click the plus box here, add a new visual effects motion tracking tab, and then open up our footage. I'll select it here and then click on open clip. And now we have our clip inside of Blender. Let's go ahead and prefetch the frames here so Blender doesn't buffer as we play through it. Then I'll also set the scene frames to the length of this clip. And now what I'll do is I'll start tracking our shot. I'll go ahead and go to the top right window here, press Shift A, add a camera for the sake of our tracking data here. And now what I want to do is I want to change the tracking settings. I'll use the blurry footage option just so our pattern and search size are a little bit larger. Now what I want to do is I'll just add a few tracking points on our shot. So maybe perhaps this top right corner here might be nice. Do the same thing over here, top right. I'll do the bottom left, kind of adjust some of these points here. And I'm selecting these points, keeping in mind where I want to add those power windows so I can track some of the points from the masks onto this tracking data. So just keep that in mind as you're adding some points. We could of course use the detect features option as well, but since this is going to be a fairly basic tripod track, I think this should be just fine. So I'll select a few more points here, maybe this one. Select one over here as well. All right, so this should be pretty good. I'm going to select all of our points here and then track through our footage. And I think we got a pretty clean track here. Yeah, everything seems to be sticking pretty well. I'm gonna add one more point on the bottom left here, just since we lost this one for a second. So I might just use this bit, track this one. There we go. So now we have some tracking data to work with. I'll go to our Solve tab, select the tripod checkbox here, and I do want to refine the focal length. I'll click on Solve Camera Motion, and we have a solve error of 2.7 pixels. Generally, I try to get below 2 pixels, or even below 1 actually at certain times. I think that should be fine actually for the sake of this tutorial and just masking out lighting data, since those masks are going to be feathered or whatever. If we were adding some CG objects to the scene, I might try to get this lower, but I think this should be just fine. So I will leave it, and I want to set up our shot as our background in the scene. So I'll click Set as Background, and now as you can see here, our camera has our footage as our background. And then I also want to, maybe I do need to set up the tracking scene. Yes, I do need to set up the tracking scene so the tracking data is aligned to our camera. So click on the Set up Tracking Scene, and now we'll go back to layout mode. I don't need these objects here, so I'll go ahead and delete these. I'll delete the light here. Now as you can see here, our tracking data here should give us some pretty nice points to track our masks onto, which should be pretty good. So now let's go to our masking tab and start laying out where we want to change the intensity of the light. So I'll go up here and add a new visual effects masking tab, open up our footage here, and now it's time to add some masks. So I'll go ahead and click on New Mask. And the first thing I'm going to do is try to bring down the corridor here, the right wall, the floor, the left wall, and the roof a little bit as well. So since I want to do all 4 walls of this corridor, including the ceiling here, I'll just actually mask out this area right here. So now what we can do is we can bring down everything other than this area right here. But now obviously this shot moves, so we need to actually track this mask onto some of the tracking points here. So what I'll do is I'll select one corner of the mask, I'll press Shift and then select this masking point here, and then I'll press Control P. And what that does is, as you can see in the mask layer here, it actually parented that point of our mask to the tracking data here. So as you can see, if I play through our scene here, you'll notice that this corner of the mask is tracked onto this tracking marker. So now we just need to do that for the other 3 points of our mask. So I'll go back to the beginning of our scene. I'll track this corner of the mask to this tracking data here. So I'll select this point first, then I'll hold down Shift, select this tracking data, Control P, and then I'll do the same thing for this corner. Select the mask, select the tracking data, Control P, and then finally the bottom right. All right. So now our mask is tracked onto our footage, so we can have complete separate control over what's inside the mask and what's outside of it. So before we add any more masks, I want to get into the compositing tab and start adjusting a few things to make sure we like what we have so far. So I'll go back to the compositing tab here, and as you can see, Blender has already set up some nodes for us. So we do need to adjust some things. First of all, I don't need any render layers added to our shot since we're not actually rendering anything in this scene. We're just using masks. So I'll delete this here. Delete this second render layer. I don't need alpha over nodes either. So now all we have is our live action shot here going to our viewer and composite nodes. So now let's add our first mask and start adjusting with it. So I'll press Shift A, I'll add a color mix, add this right before our view node, and then I'll also connect it to our composite. And then I'll press Shift A again, add an input mask, then I'll select our mask that we've just created. I actually want to relabel that so we have a little bit more clarity. So I'll go back to our masking tab and relabel this. We'll call it end of corridor. Go back to the compositing tab. Now we can select it, end of corridor. We'll add this to our mix node. And now as you can see here, we just have this white portion of our mask overlaid on top of black. But if we bring this back, you'll see what we have here. So the first thing we could try is just maybe changing our blend mode here. So maybe something like overlay or soft light, or multiply even. So multiply allows us to keep the intensity where our character is, but darken the foreground quite a bit, which is kind of nice. So obviously the edges of our mask are a little bit hard, so we have to feather this a bit to blend it into our shot a bit better. One thing we could also do is maybe change the color a little bit, make it a little bit cooler up here. It's kind of nice. Let's go ahead and feather our mask here so it blends into our shot a bit nicer. I'll go back to our masking tab. I'll select all of our masking points. I'll click on Scale Feather and then just scale it up here. And I think I want to scale it up quite a bit actually to blend it into our shot pretty effectively. Go back to the compositing tab. So a lot of the light that's on our walls here is just specularity coming from what's back here. So it doesn't make sense to bring it down too much, but this is looking already kind of nice. I might increase that feather on the mask a little bit more. So it's just feathering so the mask is most intense over here and then it fades off. Much nicer. All right, so as you can see, our corridor is brought down quite a bit and our eyes being drawn to the character. All right, so what else can we do here? Well, one thing we could do is create some pools of light above these lights in the ceiling here. So perhaps we'll go back to our masking tab. I will add a new mask. So go ahead and click on this button right here. It'll create a new mask for us and I will start kind of tracing out these practicals right here. So start right here, like so. And I'll create kind of some basic pools of light maybe that we can feather a little bit, like they're sort of glowing, something like this maybe. And I'll do the same thing on this one. I'll add a new mask layer here, create. And another way we could do this is actually just by selecting the highlights of our shot and then adding a little bit of glow to them. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to be using a mask. This is the way we'll do it this time. So let's just try this out. So we'll call this light mask. So we'll try this out. Go back to compositing and I'll create some space to overlay a new mask here. And let's see here, I'll press Shift A, we'll add an input mask, select our light mask, and then press Shift A again, add a color mix node, add this before our viewer and composite node, then add our mask right here. Change the blend mode to say overlay. Okay, overlay is not working very well. Let's see here. Maybe color dodge. Color dodge is not bad. That's what we used on the other tutorial. And we obviously need to feather these a bit. So let's go back to our masking tab. Select our points here, scale the feather, and just bring it up. I'll feather it quite a bit. Go back to compositing. All right, this is still not working too well. Let's see. I might just actually go back to masking here. I might bring these points closer to the light itself. So just reposition our mask here a bit so it's just around the light. I'll delete some of the points on this one. All right, so now we just have a little bit more soft masks around our direct source from the light. I'll select everything, scale it up a bit, scale up the feather, something like that. Let's try it out. All right, that's looking a little bit nicer. So you can see before and after now. So I'll go bring this back down to 0. You can see that there's nothing there, no glow. And then bring that back to 1. Obviously 1's gonna be too much. There we go. Let's try 0.5. You know, adds a little bit of light kind of glowing up there. Not sure I like it, but it definitely adds a stylistic look. Might try to increase our factor on our first mask here. We do need to track our second mask on top of these points. So I'll go back to our masking tab, select all of these. And while we don't have a tracking point right by our lights here, we could definitely add one. Since this is a very basic tripod track, I think we should be able to get away with tracking our masks to this point right here. So I'll select all of our points, then press Shift, select our tracking data point here, and press Control P. And now this should work just fine, tracking on our footage. All right, so finally, the last thing we'll do is just add a little bit of color correction on top of our entire shot. I'll just press Shift A, add a color balance node, connect this to our viewer as well as our composite, and maybe just cool down the foreground here where it's a little bit darker. So that's the shadows. So cool those down, maybe warm up the midtones, or even cool down the midtones as well, and then warm up the highlights. It's kind of cool. And we could also maybe warm up these lights here. I'll duplicate this color balance node and add it before our light mask. So I'll select this here, press Shift D, add it here. And check that out, we can totally change the color of the light. That's pretty cool. So didn't plan on doing this, but you can literally just change the color of the mask and add a new look. Now I'm not sure this really makes sense because this area is very blue and then you got these super orange lights lighting the area. But if you want to go stylistic, this is one way to do it. So yeah, just shows how you can control your footage pretty well, which is just a few masks. You know, you can make it blue even. Maybe we want to make it a little bit cooler. I kind of like the dinginess of this, to be honest. I mean, you could justify it in tons of different ways. You can say that this light is creating blue specularity off of the corridor here, and these are just not bright enough. You can justify it in all kinds of ways. I'm not sure it makes sense, but I think it looks kind of cool. I like the color temperature difference, and I'm gonna go with it. But those are two ways you can use some very basic masks in the Blender compositor to sort of relight your shots and create a little bit more mood, or just add a little bit of texture to your scene. I hope this video was helpful. If you're interested in these types of videos, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification. It really helps us out in growing the channel. I'll see you next time.